Welcome back everyone, Scotty Combat here, and today we're going to go over the very first Mortal Kombat game, and we're going to do a comparison of Sega, Super Nintendo, and the arcade version. I'm pretty excited. I grew up mostly playing the very first Mortal Kombat on Sega. Of course I would play it on the arcade at times, and then rarely I would play it at my friend's house, which would be on the Super Nintendo. But to compare these games is pretty interesting. I've already covered the second and third game, as well as Mortal Kombat Trilogy if you haven't seen those yet. Again, another shout out to the channel VC Decide for putting these together. Right now the Sega version is on the right, arcade is on the left. We'll also bring Super Nintendo in here as well. You know, looking at this now, I still think the pit looks really good for Sega, and I don't know if that's because I have like a biased nostalgia towards it, but Sega has very limited colors, and I think it looks decent. In fact, it has the most limited colors of the three consoles that we're looking at. I wanted to stop it here for a quick gore reference. So on the left we have arcade, on the right we have Sega. This is the bottom of the pit for the Super Nintendo. This is the most sanitized version of the three. I would say it's no surprise the arcade version has the most gore and the most blood. But something surprising here is the names are actually inside the life bars this time, which seemed like a Super Nintendo trait at some point because the names are always below the life bars in MK2 and MK3 moving forward on the SNES. Whereas for the Sega, the names are above the life bars. It's just interesting little details like that that I think are pretty neat. And this is Chef's Kiss. You got the names in the life bars, and then you have all the beautiful blood, spikes, and gore. This right here is Mortal Kombat 1 in its true habitat. I figured since we just looked at the bottom of the pit, let's look at the top too. So this is the Sega version of the pit at the very top. This is the arcade version, which you can tell definitely has more details. And this is the Super Nintendo, which I say is impressive because it does look pretty similar to the arcade. There is some blur in here. But aside from that, if you were to put these side by side, you know what you're looking at. They look pretty similar. And just like that, I say they look pretty similar. Obviously there is noticeable differences, but very noticeable similarities as well. Where the differences are definitely most noticed between the Sega and the arcade here, right? So here's some gameplay footage from Mortal Kombat 1. You know, the original Mortal Kombat on the Sega Genesis with 50 simultaneous colors. I really like this one as an example. It's a very blue sky for Sega. So think about that for a second. Sega has 50 simultaneous colors on this stage. Super Nintendo has 104, and what you're looking at now is the arcade 548. There's a lot more going on here in the arcade than there is the Super Nintendo or the Sega. This is the SNES version where the statue now takes front and center with the building in the background. The flags also weren't there in the Super Nintendo version as well, right? With just 50 colors, I'm gonna give Sega some love. Obviously it doesn't steal first place, but it does get the building alright. It's got the statue and flags. However, what it is missing is clouds moving in the background. Now this is SNES and arcade. There just seems to be a lot missing in the SNES version. I know this is hard to make sense of, but I think the SNES version does the best at making it look more like the arcade. It's just missing the most because the Sega only has 50 colors, but it's still able to pull off this much environment, right? I think it's impressive, but again, I might have some bias towards it since I grew up with it. Since we know the arcade is the best, let's keep it out for this comparison. This is the Sega, and we'll go to SNES, and we're just comparing character and environment, and which one do you think looks better? Just based off the picture itself. This was a big one for me around this time. A lot of people talked about the SNES not having blood, or not being able to use the cheat code to put blood on here. It is the most sanitized version of the game. I've heard different references as to what the fake blood is in the SNES. You can say it's sweat, you can say it's water. I always took it as sweat whenever you see the little particles pop out whenever they get hit. Now, I know most of you are already aware of it, but just real quick for those that don't know, the whole reason we even have ratings on games to this day, you know, E for everyone, M for mature, this all came from the very first Mortal Kombat game. Now, this is one I really enjoy, a good old-fashioned console war. This is between the Sega and the Super Nintendo. With as much as I've shared, I'm sure you know which one is which. Just in case, I'll go ahead and throw it out anyway. The one you're seeing on the left is the Sega, and the one you're seeing on the right is the Super Nintendo, right? You can tell definitely because there's no blood coming from the fights on the right, whereas the left, obviously there is. Now, of course, the Super Nintendo, again, does have more colors. Which one are you more in favor of? Because for me, it really is the Sega, and I know there still might be some bias there because that's what I grew up with. But even though there is limited colors, it still seems like there's more environment, the blood's vibrant, the characters are more vibrant. However, the Super Nintendo still has its props too. At least it has animations in the background. Sega just couldn't pull that off at the time, and this really makes me appreciate the console wars back then. It's much different than what it is today. So this is the Warrior Shrine. I do think it looks better on Super Nintendo. It does look like it's taking place at night. Now there is a small background detail that is missing from the Sega here, and I want to see if you notice it. I'll give you until 3, 2, 1, and that is the guards. There's guards standing in front of the audience in the SNES version. There are no guards on the Sega version. And yes, the guards are here in the arcade version. He is over here in the corner and in the front as well. I really don't think this is biased speaking, but I actually prefer the design for the roster on Sega versus the Super Nintendo, because at least it looks like there's something there. It's not just a flat gray. It does have more of a stone background, and comparing Sub-Zero here to Sub-Zero on SNES, I think Sub-Zero looks more sharp on Sega. This is like paying for a yearbook photo and getting the standard version, and then paying to have it enhanced. You get a little bit more. For everyone watching, I just want to make clear that we are getting all these versions in the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. This is SNES port, Sega port, and the arcade version. There's one thing we haven't tested out yet between these three versions, and that is the sound effects. Let's go ahead and roll in a music track that is the same song on 3 different versions. Arcade and Sega next to each other is a pretty big difference, but they still look decent for what they are. This next one here I really wanted to point out because this is one of my favorite childhood stages, and that is Goro's lair. Something that really sticks out to me is the eyes glowing in the background. I'm so thankful Sega did this. It's the small things, it really is. Obviously they're there in the arcade version because the arcade is the very top, but the Sega actually made it more prominent, which I think is understandable when you have less to work with for the Sega. Whatever you can make pop, you're gonna make pop, right? I'm still impressed with some of the details they were able to pull off in the background. These stages look similar, but so different at the same time. This is one of the difficult ones to compare. To no surprise, the arcade version takes it when it comes to blood. I do think Goro looks about the same in all the versions, just obviously he's bigger in the arcade version because the arcade characters are bigger than the other ports. With that being said, kudos to Sega and Super Nintendo for making him look as good as he does. But arcade does take the cake in animations all the way around. Next up we have Shang Tsung, and again, I think they look pretty similar. I would say the biggest difference would be the stages in the background. If I had to pick between the two, I would probably go with the arcade version of the pit because it does look really good in MK Trilogy when you bring all the characters here. As much as I do like Goro's lair on Sega, I would go with arcade. You gotta admit, for 1992, what they did here was pretty impressive. What they pulled off on the arcade was amazing, and the ports did a good job doing what they could too. It's interesting to see on the Sega version that a character has to flip in one at a time, whereas arcade they all flip in together. And it's so crazy to think this was just going to be another game at the arcade, and look what it turned out to be. Hands down, the arcade definitely takes it, and SNES has its strong points, and Sega does too. I do like what they work with as far as color limitations and how bright they make things. And before we know it, Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection is going to be here. I can't wait, guys. October the 30th is around the corner, and December the 12th isn't too far for those waiting on their physical orders. However, any more Mortal Kombat update videos that come out, I will be throwing them your way. And thanks for watching, everyone. I will catch you live and or in the next video. Much love, everyone, and take care.